Very good morning to all our dear listeners and viewers. Welcome to yet another edition of our weekly talk show, ACFIM Talks. Again with you in the studios today, hosting the program is Felix Kafuma, and I expect to be joined by Xavier Ejoyi. This name is no stranger to the civil society fraternity. He is the country director of Action Aid Uganda. We all know that Action Aid has been at the forefront of fighting injustices, exclusion, and poverty. And he has a wealth of experience on issues with democratic governance and human rights. And I'll also have on set Eddie Kainda, who works with Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. He's an economist, and I think we need him to discuss the figures when we are discussing and reflecting the performance of NRM in the last 35 years, because I think one of the things they boast about is the economy, but what do those figures translate into? Probably now, Eddie, you're most welcome on the set.
Thank you, Felix.
Yes, before we get started, I'm encouraging each one of you, grab a cup of coffee, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, ACFIM Uganda, and also you can follow us live on Twitter at ACFIM UG and our Facebook page, ACFIM. And so that you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which is weekly, Secrets Known. Okay, before I unpack this discussion, let me share a couple of interesting statistics. One thing for sure is next week, come 12th May, I think it will be a Thursday or Wednesday, one of those 2 days. The NRM chairperson and president-elect and incumbent Yoweri Kaguta Museveni will be swearing in for his 6th term straight. Probably that's going to make him one of the longest serving presidents on the land of Africa. And probably when you look at his tenure for the last 35 years, those are more than 3 decades. When he finishes the 6th term, he will probably have made the 4th decade. But we need to take stock of the tenure of NRM under the stewardship of the general. We know very well that when he came into power, he did inherit a country that was coming out of a ravaging war. The economy was doing badly, social service delivery had broken down, and his ascent to the throne was a lease of life to many Ugandans. 35 years or so more down the road, we now look critically at the 10-point program, the Bible, where he promised the things he had to undertake. I also must remind you that along the way, in 2015, the 10-point program was revised. So we have 2 sets of commandments, the 2 sets of 10 commandments by the general. But to briefly play the devil's advocate, because to briefly play the devil's advocate, in 1986, when he took over this country, the economy was at its lowest. And since then, it has grown at a rate of 6%. Although this week, the Minister of Finance did tell us how, because of COVID pandemic, our growth had declined to under 3%. But in terms of the expanding the economy has grown from I think then we were 4 billion now to over 40, from 14.4 billion to over 15 trillion Uganda shillings. So you see that there's a per capita growth of 14.4 trillion in the span of about 30 years. The domestic revenue collection has also grown from 5 billion to 17.5 trillion, but we are going to discuss this in tandem with our domestic debt and the foreign debt as well. The poverty levels have dropped from 56.4 to 19.7%. How does this translate? I was just reading, and we were told that due to the pandemic, close to 1 million Ugandans lost jobs, and with the stimulus package not yet really delivering us to the desired, we are seeing also more SMEs at the threat of closure. So the effects of COVID are real, but this doesn't discount that the figures that are shared in terms of the success show a poverty reduction. But that's another discussion we shall have as well. I also must point out that the factories in 1986, Uganda had only 80 factories, and many of them were government-led, because then we were running a public sector economy. And since then, they have grown to over 4,920. And these are figures, probably they're even more, because this is by January 2020. So probably we've hit the 5,000 mark in terms of factories. So there's an expanse in that area. Another area where NRM boasts to have performed or scored highly has been in power generation. From 150 megawatts, and by then we only had the Owen Forest Dam, to now 1,254 megawatts from a number of dams that have been constructed. Bujagari, Simba, mention it. But how affordable is this power, even when the generation has increased? Those are questions. Although the access has slightly increased, in fact, gradually, from 5.6% in 1991 to 42% at present. So there's an increase in the population accessing electricity. There are also figures that are posted around the average life expectancy from 48 years in 1995 to 63 years. Probably now it's 65 years. I think the new figures suggest 65 years. So even maternal mortality rates have reduced significantly from 336 per 1,000 live births to from 506 per live 100,000 live births to 336 by 2020. So that's another good area. When it comes to education, we've seen the enrollment increasing significantly by almost 12-fold. The infrastructure development, when you come to roads, I was looking at the figures they are posting that they have paved a network of over 55,000 kilometers from 1,000 kilometers that they did inherit in 1986. I'm just giving a synopsis of what so far we can talk about as the achievements NRM is boasting about for the last 35 years. Okay, but as we get the ball rolling, I also must point out the 10-point program, because that is going to kind of like guide our discussions. We all know the number one on the 10-point program was something to do with democracy. Number two was security. Then number three was consolidating national security and elimination of all forms of sectarianism. How far have we done on that one? Then there was something to do with defending and consolidating the national independence, building an independent and integrated self-sustaining national economy. At that point in time, we were running a public sector economy. Now we are running a private sector-led economy. Number 6 talked about restoring and improving social services and rehabilitating the all-ravaged areas. How are we doing in terms of that, of ensuring that the people access public services of quality? Then number 7 I call this the golden one, was eliminating all forms of corruption and misuse of power. How is Uganda faring in that area? Then number 8 was redressing errors that had resulted into dislocation of sections of population and improvement of others. Then cooperation with other African countries in defending human and democratic rights of our brothers in other parts of Africa. So our foreign agenda policy in Somalia, in Southern Sudan, in Congo at some point, in Rwanda at some point. So we need to discuss that in perspective. And then the last one was mainly following an economic strategy of a mixed economy. This has been dropped since then. And I think that explains why in 2015, a new 10-point program is ushered in to replace the original one. But we'll discuss also the new one at some point. Okay, Eddie, let me bring you here on this one. How would you sum up the 35 years of NRA/NRM?
Thank you, Felix. Thank you, viewers, for watching ACFIM Talks. My name is Eddie Kainda, and I'll straight away go to your point. When you look at Uganda's trajectory from 1986, when the new government, those were the rebels who had captured government by then, were coming in, they promised us a developmental state. When you dissect the 10-point program, you straight away see that if government had implemented most of the programs as it had promised, Uganda would transit into a developmental state. But quickly, when you look at how it's performed, you shall realize that from 1986 to around 1996, then 2001, NRM had tried to kind of put together itself and deliver on the promises it had promised in the 10-point program. And you would see a president who was intolerant to issues of state institutions performing poorly. You would see a president who was intolerant on a bad army, an indisciplined police, an indisciplined army. But also, you would see a president who was intolerant with state machinery that was corrupt. But ahead of 2001 towards 2005-6, things started changing a little, and you'd see that there was an emergence of a deeper state within the state, where persons were using underhand methods to kind of put a stop to the 10-point program. And when you look at 2011 onwards, for me, I would think things started getting astray, and you recall that the public opinion within the public domain was that probably the president would hand over power around 2006. Towards 2011, when he doesn't hand over power, people start getting guilty about his performance. And that is when we see a lot of criticism coming in terms of what the president is doing. But specifically for me, there are certain attributes we can put onto the NRM to have achieved. First of all, the president inherited a country that had about 10 million people around 1986. And today we have about 46 million people. That's an achievement, because we know that a country is as good as its population, because population provides market. Therefore, when the president celebrates that I have immunized people and children have been able to grow and the population has increased, that is an achievement. But also, one of the things I can attribute to the president is the universal education that was put in place. Remember that in 1996, if we recall, primary education alone had about 2 million children in school, but today we can say that the number of children in school at primary level at around 8.5 million shillings. That's 8.5 million children. That's an achievement, because you can imagine if most of these children were in the villages loitering, what that means. Irrespective of the fact that UPE schools are more or less of collection centers where children go to either to play and there's less learning, the fact that they get collected and be in one place is good enough. But we need to put in place scenarios where children actually come to learn and make sure that they do learn. But also, when you look at the fiscal issues, we had an increase in the amount of tax that is collected from around 5 trillion to around over 50 trillion today, which is for me a good thing in terms of raising the profile of the economy. But the issue is, how is that money being used to uplift different sections of the economy of the people, but also translating into social services. Now, today, when you look at what government is doing vis-a-vis what it promised in 1986, you can see very, very significant gaps. Whereas we have had an increase in revenue, but we also have a massive increase in corruption. We see a lot of deeper state performance in terms of a section of the population taking over almost all national resources. You shall realize that 10% of the population in Uganda control over 90% of the resources Uganda has in terms of economy. Let it be in education, let it be in health, let it be in construction, among others. In conclusion on what you asked, for me, I see a government that performed well in the very first 10 years, but a government that has gone astray, and we can no longer see a developmental state coming in hand. I'm not sure what the government, what the president is going to do in the next 5 years, but I think the house needs to be cleaned. Back to you, Felix.
Okay, Xavier, thank you for joining us. You are most welcome to ACFIM Talks. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much, and I apologize for joining.
I don't seem to hear Xavier.
Hello?
Xavier, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You seem not to be hearing me, but I can hear you loud and clear. Hello?
Xavier, can you hear me very well?
Yes.
I can't hear Xavier. I don't know why. But I have him in the studio. Probably, Xavier, use your headsets. If you can have your headsets on, I could probably hear you very well, so I can quickly throw you in the deep end, because you found us when we had started.
Can you hear me?
I can hear Xavier, but from your voice is very low.
Okay.
Probably you turn up the microphone volume. It's quite low for me.
Okay, can you hear me better now? I've taken it to the maximum, but...
Okay, I think that's better. Okay. Okay, fine. Xavier, you found us when we are trying to take stock of NRM the last 35 years, and Eddie was kind of like getting the conversation started, looking at I think it took a period of about 10 years or 5 years. He looked at 86 to 96, and then from 96 around 2001. I think how NRM has kept evolving and changing. But let me pick your thoughts on this one, because we know the general promised a fundamental change in his maiden speech. But what is your overall view of NRM's performance in the last 35 years in power?
So your line is not clear.
My line is not clear.
It's breaking actually from my side. I don't know for my colleague on the panel, but it's breaking. I don't think I got even 50% of what you just asked.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is the line clear now? Eddie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly well.
Eddie hears me very well, and it's only you is having a challenge. Am I clear now? Xavier? Wow. I think it's your network, Xavier. I don't know that it's mine here, but my colleague is hearing me very well, and I don't know what we can do. But
and I'm hearing my colleague very well, incidentally, because when he said his was just loud and clear, but your line keeps breaking.
Wow. Okay, let's see what we can do about that. Let me see if I can do something about it. Okay, so how about now? Can I go ahead and shoot my question? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I seem to be having a very bad network. I don't know if it's on your end or on my end. Eddie, am I clear to you?
Yeah, you're breaking, but I can hear you.
But I'm breaking.
Yeah.
Okay, just a minute. Let me do this. Xavier, am I now clear?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I've changed the network. Thank you. Okay, Xavier, sorry about that. Let me just quickly throw you into the deep end right now. What is your honest view and assessment of NRM for the last 35 years?
Thank you so much. I think that to make an assessment of NRM over 35-year period is really a challenge, because as you know, other than the swearing in that happened on the 26th of January 1986, which was after a protracted 5-year guerrilla war. Then the next level of swearing in or governments that were sworn in of NRM came as a result of elections. And each of the election cycles comes with very specific benchmarks that the NRM committed to for elections. And so to gauge overall 35-year period is certainly going to be a challenge, because it needs to be understood in the 5-year chunks for which the NRM government sought election and the Ugandans gave it the mandate to rule. So that benchmark is important, because we can unfairly judge NRM this performance if we do not look at the dimensions that are packed in those 5 years.
Okay. Let me help you. Let me help you out on this one, Xavier. I get your point. If that is the case, let's now be fair enough, because when he was swearing in, he did have an action plan what he called the 10-point program, against which he was going to evaluate himself. And I think you remember the 10-point program. I think number 1 was democracy. He had something around security as number 2. He had something about running a mixed economy, eliminating corruption, restoring social services. So probably let's apply the 10-point program as a measure or a yardstick of assessing the performance for the last 35 years.
Yeah, and that's what I was coming to. So if you gauge against the 10-point program, I think that the overall performance assessment, then that is a mixed bag. First, I think it is important. NRM promised a fundamental change to Ugandans, and they put up the 10-point program that really came into place after, as I said, 5 years of war. This country was in ruins. The economy, the infrastructure, even politically, one coup after another, it was a difficult moment. So first, I think it was a good starting point for the NRM to put in place a legal or legislative framework and ensure that Ugandans would come together and make a constitution that people's aspirations will be reflected into, a progressive constitution that captured the key Bill of Rights and our commitments to the values of human rights, rule of law, but also the subsequent subsidiary legislation that strengthened the implementation of that constitution. Reform processes that put in place institutions that would enhance the rule of law, institutions such as the judicial, the judiciary that became very strong under this establishment, but also the issues around the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Amnesty Commission that helped to address in some of the legacies of war that we saw in this country. But also to decentralize or devolve power rather than centralizing it. I think the decentralization process was a key one that took power from the center of government to the local governments, and a very elaborate process to that extent. So if you look at that, the reform processes of legislation and the economic reforms that were intended to bring this country into a sustainable financial system, I think it is an important process that we went through. Our constitution of 1995 is something that, despite some of the shortfalls at that time where multipartyism was taken out of the picture, and the movement system was adopted, something that really put us into a lot of challenges, the constitution was fairly a progressive one, and the reform process that this government embarked on. That said, over the years, we've seen the progress that we're making with our democratization journey, with the rule of law, being reversed. Now you find institutions that have been established under the law, the institutions are not fully functional. As I speak today, as an example, the Uganda Human Rights Commission does not have a chair. And why the chair has not been appointed, I think it is for the appointing authority to explain to Ugandans, is this institution, if it is still important, why is the institution not? We've also seen corruption very high on the rise and disabling many things in this country, and yet a key institution that was to advance the fight against corruption, the Inspectorate of Government, the Inspector General of Government has not been appointed again over a year now. So if you look at some of the promises that were made in the fight against corruption, they have not yielded to the expectations that the NRM made. But as I said, each term of office brings out a unique challenge, and it would be important to assess and scrutinize rather than blanket in the 35 years. Let's take, for example, what the NRM promised Ugandans in the last 5 years. Okay. And have we arrived there? I think progress has been made that we need to acknowledge. But certainly we are not where we ought to be in the last 5 years, over the last 5 years, with the promises of going into middle income status, Chisanja Kuna Mchezo, which was focused on addressing issues of corruption. If you ask today, can we really say that we have delivered on that? Certainly, we have not to the degree that the Ugandans expected. But we're also seeing, whereas progress was made in the areas of education, enrollment in primary school and so on, the quality of primary education, the dropout rates are unacceptably high in primary schools, that a significant proportion of Ugandan children enrolling in school, let alone not effectively learning, they're actually dropping out of school for avoidable causes. I think that is something that really needs to be looked at. Generally, the quality of services points to a direction that is not promising from what the NRM government put before it. And I think that is my assessment overall, that whereas some progress was made initially, along the way, we are receding on our journey of this democratization and the rule of law. And that turn, I don't want us to lose the point of convolvulating it over 35 years, because that in itself is also a challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This is why I bring in Eddie. A number of issues have been raised. It's a mixed bag of according to Xavier, that there's some progress has been made, but also there are reversals. So it's becoming a bit difficult here to assess the performance of NRM. And of course, with cautiously, not necessarily lapping it with 35 years. But the reason why I took the journey of looking at the 10-point program, because even along the way it changes, it is that I think that was like the master work plan NRM prefer to work with. But let me quickly, discussing with you on this, come on the issue of the economic growth rate. The figures they have posted as success, the growth of the economy from 4 billion to over 15 trillion, the growth of the economy by 6% across, it doesn't seem to really translate. If I'm a common man and you show me those figures, I simply cannot marry those figures with what I'm seeing, because the effects of COVID are still with us. People are still poor. Unemployment is a very big issue right now. Probably it's one of the issues that costed Museveni during the 2021 elections, a big chunk of elections. It's still an unanswered question, even when they post figures to do with so many factors they have constructed. Point us the picture of this economy, because these figures don't necessarily translate into what I can clearly say as a common man, that yes, I have money in the pocket because of NRM for the last 35 years, for that matter, or for the last 5 years.
Thank you, Felix. I want to point ourselves to the last 10 years. For example, the last 2 terms we have had under NRM. We notice that whereas national figures point us towards economic growth and an increase in the GDP, among others, we cannot see that translate into development, and there are wider cases of inequality between the rich and the poor. But I want to specifically point you to the various programs government has undertaken to ensure that people come out of poverty. You shall recall the Intandikwa scheme, the Prosperity for All, the Operation Wealth Creation, the Emioga of recent, but also before we go into Emioga and we are sinking into it, we now have the new parish development model. Now, and when you look at the performance of these programs, they are so superficial. Now, we cannot have an economy that is developing that is not backed up by economic production from the masses. You should focus to what brings about economic development in Uganda: agriculture, Do we have a sustainable agricultural system that shall increase the amount of goods and services on the market? Do we have food security? In Uganda, 60% of income is spent on making sure that people eat for the last 35 years. But also we still have persons who go hungry when Uganda is one of the biggest food baskets of the world. And now you ask, if we have had these programs, just like Xavier mentioned, then we are having them eaten up by corruption. We are having them eaten up by the deep state. We are having them eaten up by the mafia into the system. And today, President himself is coming up to say, what can I do? You had him on the Labor Day when he was saying that Umeme is a thief, and I do not know who brought this to me. We are having the president himself bypassed by his own systems, and he's having himself being taken for a ride by his own system. But when you go to the macroeconomic level, whereas we have factories, Museveni tells us that Uganda has over 10,000 factories today. Where are they serving? If we see 75% of the youth unemployed, and knowing that Uganda, the biggest population of Uganda is youth, then how will you rate the performance of the economy? Probably we have done well in controlling the inflation, but when you look at what COVID has brought in, ensuring that the velocity of money is low, but ensuring that we do not have enough sufficient liquid to ensure that systems move, it is now the time government should have brought in a stimulus, but also adopted an open fiscal policy and an open monetary policy where we can have increased money in circulation, for example, through reducing the central bank rates, reducing the interest rates, but also bring in the Uganda Development Bank and the African Development Bank to provide sustainable stimulus that is based on low interest rates, but also an open fiscal policy that reduces the taxes. I mentioned earlier that Uganda has violated all forms of a fair tax. People do not pay tax because it's convenient. People pay tax because they are coerced. People do not pay tax because they don't see value in what they're paying for. You know, the whole system in the last 10 years has gotten upside down, and you wonder how the president is going to start in this new term. You saw when the Minister of Finance was presenting the budget about 2 weeks ago, duplications. Ideally, we would have had an incremental budget, but what the Minister of Finance is doing is duplicating the budget. That what we had last year is more or less what we have today, and in some cases we have shameful duplications, as you should have seen in the public domain or in the media. And at the end of the day, you do not see the president managing to revamp the system unless something is fundamentally put right. For me, it's now upon the president to ensure that either we reinvent ourselves or we do not see a term that is sustainable for the next 5 years. Back to you,
Felix. Fair enough. Xavier, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Now, Eddie was discussing what these figures of economic growth rate, economic expansion, and per capita growth, how they translate into what do they mean to a common person? But let me throw you in here on the issue of democracy, because first of all, the president is going to swear in next week at the backdrop of one of the most interesting elections we had, probably in Eastern Europe, the 2021 elections, for many reasons. As observers, but as people who believe in democracy, there were a number of gaps identified in the process that has led to the president being re-elected. In fact, some people have argued that probably elections in Africa are becoming more of a ritual because of the gaps that continuously they present that make them fall short of being free, fair, and credible. But also in the same tenure, let's look at the last 5 years, we had, that's the tenure where we had a number of killings, rampant abductions, arrests. At some point, the police chief was changed. We had a number of murders and assassinations take place. We had something that was unprecedented in the tenure of NRM. We had last seen it during Obote's reign, when they descended and they attacked the sanctity of the parliament. So, in terms of democracy, are we making any reversals, or how would you describe our democracy curve as a country? Where are we?
Okay, so again, I will speak to what I had. The last bits of that question, I didn't get it, but I heard you talk about the trend of our democracy over the last 5 years. I think that's what I will concentrate on. I think that it is important to note, as I said, that we certainly, in 1986, in the 1990s, we started off on a good note. There was a reform-minded approach to governance and to addressing the challenges that this country faced over the decades during the rule of Idi Amin and the Obote, and thereafter, before that, coming out of the colonial rule. Now, over the last 5 years, it was certainly a very challenging moment. Democracy is not just an event where an election is held and a leader is declared. That is a key, necessary, but not sufficient, certainly, attribute of democracy. Democracy is a process in which we're able to see the interplay of rule of law, where the systems that govern a country are based on established laws such as our constitution and other subsidiary legislations, and the process in itself of elections is seen to be fair to all the actors, and also importantly that those who get elected out of that democratic exercise of citizens who delegate their right to govern to the government which has been elected. It should be seen that the government in power is accountable to the citizens, is accountable in the resources that have been put at its disposal. Certainly, government has all the resources and means of raising those resources, taxation and so on, and natural resources at the disposal of government to be able to ensure that they meet the needs of the citizens, especially providing public services that are of the quality that allows the citizens to thrive and move to the next level of life. Now, over the last 5 years, we instead saw reversals, and some significant reversals in the process of governing of this country. Certainly, we saw the space restricting for other political actors, and the president has been on record that by 2021 he will not be seeing any opposition political party. I think that I don't know the extent to which that vision was achieved, but to say, first of all, in a multi-party political dispensation, that you do not wish to see political opposition at the end of the tenure of office, I think points to a direction which marks of a lack of tolerance for dissenting political or divergent political position. And the architects of democracy, right from the time immemorial, certainly had in mind the fact that a country's political process and democratic credential is strengthened when you have competition for ideas, competition for policies, competition for what you want citizens really to benefit from. And when you have that in the political realm, like you have in the economic realm, the quality of our leadership, the quality of our democracy improves. Certainly, if you are having views exchanged on a particular point of legislation, it strengthens that legislation. And so that level of intolerance towards the political opposition, we saw many being arrested. We saw the space even for organizing. I know during 2020, the excuse can be made of we were in a COVID situation and so on. But certainly, COVID only happened in 2020. It started in March 2020. So certainly, there's more that could have been done. The space for media, independent media, people who are bringing information to Ugandans so that Ugandans can make informed decisions. We saw a targeted attack on media, and a number of media personalities are certainly nursing wounds, and others may have given up on that profession altogether. We saw space shrinking for civil society and targeted attack using legislation that is otherwise intended for noble purposes to squeeze civil society in the space that they are not able to hold the state accountable for the promises that it made to Ugandans. And so over that period of time, we just want Ugandans to know that that level of, that approach to the democracy or rule in this country is not promising for our democratic credentials. It is a turn taking us backwards. And my expectation is that the NRM, that at the beginning made a pledge and took this country to a reform path, needs to come to the realization that did not take that turn of reform for its own sake. It was for the sake of this country and its citizens. And the citizens of this country deserve better in the democratization trajectory. And so that is what I could say relating to that.
Wow, thank you so much.
Felix, if I could interject in what you are asking Xavier about how we are progressing democratically. You notice that in the last 5 years, that is where we have had Uganda transiting into commercialized electoral politics to the highest. Remember that we had this in 2016, but when you look at how money has penetrated democracy, it has been one of the biggest factors for Uganda's democratic reversals, for my case. And when you look at the parliament that you want to have sworn in this month, most of the candidates are coming into this parliament because they had the money, not because they have the ideas. Now you can imagine how these guys are going to preside over the next legislative processes that we're going to have as a country. And for me, we are heading in for times that are not better than what we have had.
Wow. I want us to we shall go for a break towards the end, but there's this question, because I'm hearing all this, and let me first begin with you, Eddie. Then I'll come to Xavier. The 10-point program in 2015 changed. I hope you know that. I think now we adopted something new. It had issues to do with fighting ideological disorientation, eliminating sectarianism. It keeps talking about sectarianism of late. And then it talked about improving education to redefine human resource, then facilitating a private sector-led economy.
Sorry, Eddie, I can't hear you well with that question.
No, I'm not yet asked the question. I'm just showing how along the way in 2015. Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Yes. How along the way in 2015, Museveni abandons the original 10-point program and comes up with a new one that had elements of fighting ideological disorientation. He still speaks about this, eliminating sectarianism, improving education to refine human resource, facilitating private sector-led economic growth, and I think he's doing something around this one, developing road, railway, and electricity infrastructure. When you look at number 5, that explains why some of the figures they post in terms of success are heavy at railway, road, and electricity infrastructure, although the SGR thing is another thing altogether. market expansion, integration. But the interesting one, develop service sector to create jobs. But the one where I want to really bring your discussion is the 10th, where he talked about deepen democratic governance and also modernize agriculture to increase household incomes. Now, do these new areas in the revised 10-point program, actually, when you look at them, do they reflect the new emerging challenges and issues Ugandans would want to see addressed, in your opinion? Is this a more realistic plan than the previous one?
Felix, if I go first, for me, you cannot deepen democracy in a poor country, and that can't happen. When you look at an example I've just given you of the commercialized electoral process in the last presidential elections we have had and the parliamentary elections, what democracy are you talking of when persons can only be given 500 shillings to vote a person in power? You cannot, there is no way the president is going to deepen democracy with a very, very poor population. You could have heard what COVID did to ourselves, both in the urban and rural areas. How do you expect somebody to have a mature ideological orientation when he cannot have food on his table? When people are eating banana peels to survive, and you are expecting to have that person mature, ideologically developed into a mature reasoning person. I'm lacking the best words to use for this, but for me, that can't happen. When you're talking about sectarianism and tribalism, now, all factors constant, the president has been responsible for this. I think we are having a lot of disparities in terms of how this country is developing for different reasons. When you move around the country, you can always see that there are disparities in economic growth, in economic development, but also in ideology, just like you're mentioning. I cannot attribute this to the fact that probably money is skewed toward a given region, but it's about establishing a mechanism that allows equal distribution of resources at a national level. But you can, when you specifically look at sectors like education and health, Uganda lacks a facility that you can be proud of that can take care of the national health system. Mulago being a national referral, you saw what happened in COVID, that almost some of these persons who go out to seek medical attention during COVID, when the flights were cut off, literally everybody got stuck. And some of these people could have died because they didn't want to die, but because the national health system gotten stuck. Now, is that what you call, what do you call it? Deepening democratic governance. You cannot deepen democratic governance in such a scenario. But lastly, on developing the private sector, the role of government in deepening the growth of the private sector is regulation. Government has failed its role as a regulator of taxes, a regulator of policies, a regulator of prices. Now, capitalism has taken over, and you know the face of capitalism is ugly. The best person or the strongest person, it's you all, and Ugandans have been reduced to that. And when you go downtown, for example, the moment you cannot get your way out economically, then you know that you're shattered, battered, and tattooed by the system. We think that is developing democratically. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Xavier, this is why I bring you in. Probably you will comment on that one, but also because our time is running fast, I will also ask you to help us paint. First of all, what are your expectations in the incoming 5 years come next week, we shall be having a new tenure, a new parliament will be sworn in, president will be sworn in. What should we expect? That is one. But also, what for you, what is the outlook of the next 5 years? But you can also comment on that question which I asked earlier.
Thank you so much, for Eddie, for that question. So the first thing is that revising the 10-point program and adding other key issues, including ideological orientation and accountability. I think overall, I think it would be good, in essence, to say, okay, in 1984, in 1985, in 1986, we came up with this agenda of a 10-point program, and it is a few decades down the road. Can we assess ourselves where we have progressed with the agenda that we promised Ugandans? I think that would be a good point, if it is for not just an academic exercise, but is to ensure that the government is actually delivering on its promises to Ugandans, or if they are not, they come out clearly and say that we were unable to, for reasons 1, 2, and 3, and this is something that we regret we have not done. And I think that is an important point of conversation to enable us to move forward with that. Otherwise, it will just be rebaptizing the old 10-point program by adding in another 8 or whatever number that comes in. But if it is for reflection, for purposes of learning and to ensure accountability for the delivery, because look, Ugandans have entrusted the NRM with, as I said, with all the resources in this country to deliver, including to borrow resources on their behalf. That I do not think has been well managed to date. So I think that for the benefit of Ugandans, they deserve accountability of how far we have gone with ending corruption, how far we've gone by providing jobs, quality services. You talk about enforcing the observance and respect of rule of law. How come that people are brazenly being arrested by forces in this country that we cannot account for in a democratic and transparent way? What really happens to the police or the security forces who arrest extrajudicially Ugandan citizens? I think, is that the rule of law? Is that rule by law? So I think that for me, that is an important dimension that we need to face. Regarding expectations out of this regime, it is on the one hand, I want to be hopeful that the government of the NRM will recognize that in the times that they have spent in power, there are Ugandans who feel excluded out of, 1, the political process, and 2, out of this economy, and that the NRM will deliberately make an effort and go out of its comfort zone and things that they chest thump themselves about, and work out towards including those Ugandans who feel alienated in the political process and in the economic process of this country. I think that is my expectation of this government that is coming in. That said, in the context that we are in, seeing the things that we are seeing, especially the cost of public administration shooting through the roof and emerging out of the COVID-19 situation, I think that might be a huge threat. Let me give you why. Because now we have districts, created districts up to over 140 of them. We have 10 cities and maybe counting coming up. Each of those reflects a public administration position that needs to be funded. Uganda has over 2 million, not 2,000, elective positions that need to be facilitated by the taxpayers. And where is this resource going to come from? Right now, we are borrowing left, right, and center to meet the basic needs of citizens. And I think that if something fundamental in terms of cutting down the cost of public administration is not done, it will be even difficult, even with the best intentions, for government to meet the expectations of citizens. And therefore, it calls for really a robust reflection of the leadership of the NRM and the government to make some tough decisions and ensure that the patronage network, the positions and the endless creation of districts and administrative units needs to be put to a stop. As we speak now, you have over 350 sub-counties that do not have, they don't have funding to operate, and yet we have leaders, LC5, LC3 chairpersons elected and councils elected. Another 300 town councils also in place, constituted fully, but there is no budget to run them. And so what kind of administration will they be presiding over if they cannot successfully raise the revenue, or they are not funded to do so? We've seen a reversal of the decentralization agenda, and of course, with the creation of administrative units, even decentralization itself will become not effective, because the resources that were supposed to be decentralized, the authority that was supposed to be decentralized, is now being drawn back to the center. And as a result of that, service delivery becomes a challenge. And unless we relook at that, we will just be feeling good about administrative units that are created, some on ethnic grounds and others just for purposes of patronage, and it will not deliver what Ugandans want to deliver. So I think going forward, my final point is that because we came out of a very divisive, contested election, my appeal to the leadership of the NRM is genuinely, if they want to invest in a national dialogue process that will bring all spectrum of the political class and as a matter of fact, all sections of the society, to bring them together and have a discourse on how we can bridge our differences and run this country more effectively and to the benefit of every Ugandan. I appeal to the president to consider what he did in 1986 when he formed the government of national unity. Let him genuinely commit to having a dialogue process that we can address our differences as a country, as a starting point. Thank you.
Wow, quite interesting. Eddie, you're having the final say on this one because our time is fast spent. What should be done differently?
I know he's watching, or he will watch this. First of all, let him put in place a system that manages the fiscal policy of Uganda. Loaning ourselves to the international community, World Bank, is not the solution. Economies naturally grow organically without external support, limited external support. Secondly, let the president put in place an open monetary policy where people can get access to finance and low and cheap access to loans and credit, make sure that we can have natural organic growth. Thirdly, let the president stop corruption. For as long as we cannot stop corruption, then our efforts shall be put to waste. The last message to you, Felix, and those who are watching us, and to the nation is, in Africa, it's not about lack of resources that do affect the development of economies. It's lack of priorities. For as long as we have our priorities right, then we can always lead the best nations in Africa, but also in Uganda in particular. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Indeed, our priorities should be put right because on 12th, we shall be spending 7 billion to host about 15 heads of state to justify why we were able to have the next 5-year term of office. That's a priority issue. Thank you so much. With the studio, I've been with Xavier Ejoyi, who is the country director of Action Aid, and then also Eddie, who is also working with Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, and is also an economist, discussing what should be done in the next couple of years, but also assessing the performance of NRM regime for the last 35 years, but broken down into term limits. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be with you again next week, same time. Wish you all the best. See you then. Bye-bye.
The monster of money politics is eating up Uganda's democracy. When you take money from a candidate, it means you are feeding the monster. Then you become a part of the problem. When a candidate who overspends on campaigns is elected, he or she will not represent voters but himself. He or she will engage in corruption to recover campaign money. Social services will not be delivered and the voter will suffer more. Voter, let's be wise. Give democracy a chance. Do not sell your vote. Focus on the issue.